The Frontline podcast is brought to you by Legion Technologies. Hi, we're your hosts, Tracy Chernoff, Senior Director of Employee Engagement at Legion Technologies.
And John Denton, Senior Enterprise Account Executive at Legion Technologies. Hourly employees want and need flexibility and predictability. They desire more connection and belonging with their peers and companies. And businesses want to maximize productivity while enhancing employee engagement to reduce turnover. Who said we can't have it all?
The Frontline podcast is focused on discussing the challenges that come along with having an hourly workforce and shedding light on these important employees who are often overlooked. You'll hear from leaders bringing transformational and innovative change to their organization and ways you can improve your own experience and the experiences of your employees, no matter where you sit in your organization.
At Legion, we believe that intelligent automation powers Legion Technology workforce management to solve these challenges. Be sure to subscribe to the Frontline podcast so you're the first to hear our monthly episodes, which will come out every third Thursday of every month. Learn more at legion.co. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn and get ready to be a part of the solution.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Frontline podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And speaking of this episode, it's a very exciting one because we're talking about how Cinemark, the business, is driving employee engagement. And we can't do that without a very special guest. So let me introduce Christopher Frey to you. He is the Director of Workforce Management with Cinemark Theaters. With decades of successful leadership experience in the field, he's been able to bring that valuable insight into Cinemark's home office and their workforce management approach. Christopher and his team manage the labor budget and processes for all domestic theaters within the circuit. Additionally, as the business owner of Legion, they test, configure, and maintain audit compliance, as well as support the field for any questions or concerns they may have related to the system. Christopher also works closely with both general managers and field leaders to ensure staffing levels are correct or to identify and resolve issues if they're not. Christopher lives in McKinney, Texas with his wife and two dogs, Rocky and Taffy. Lately, they spend most of their time going to the movies, of course, because he's at Cinemark, racing go-karts, or working on their house. So Christopher, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. It's great to be here.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to kick us right off because we're really excited to be able to speak to someone who uses Legion and is totally invested in this workforce management ethos and environment. So before we get into that, I know I just did this whole intro on you, but tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who are you? We know where you're located, so that's great. But when we think about what you do in terms of being a director of workforce management, your bio kind of drove this down and dug into it a little bit, but can you make it even more real for us? Like where did this all start for you?
Sure. Yeah. So working in movie theaters was actually my very first job. So I started working at AMC theaters when I was like 15 years old. My buddy and I were just walking through the mall. We needed a job. And so we both went in, applied for a job, got the job on the same day. And then worked for AMC for a few years and then joined up with Cinemark Theaters in 1996, which dates me a little bit, but started with them in 96 in my hometown of Overland Park, Kansas. And just started as a projectionist while I was going to school. You know, like any other 20-year-old, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And so, I was just threading projectors and going to class. And then one day my GM just came up to me and asked if I was interested in being a manager, which I hadn't given any thought to at all, but I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And so I'm a manager. And then about 2 months later, he got promoted to open a new theater that we were opening in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so about a month after that, he called me up and said, hey, I need some help opening this theater. And so that was the crossroads where I kind of just took stock of my life and was like, maybe I could do this as a career. And so I moved to Baton Rouge, like with a little tiny U-Haul trailer pulling behind me, and took all my stuff down there, making very little money and just broke, but trying to get some experience. And so did that. And then about 8 months later, another guy was like, hey, I need help opening this theater in El Paso, Texas. So I went to El Paso, did the same thing. And about 8 months after that, I became a GM. And
wow.
Funny story, I actually became a GM at the original theater I started at as an employee, which I learned a very interesting lesson in that it's very important how you treat people because you never know if they might become your boss. And so there were some assistant managers that I worked for as an employee that I came back to be their general manager. And it was fun seeing the look on their face when I walked in. And so then I moved around a lot. I went out to California, and then ultimately ended up in Colorado for about 20 years. I've worked at 24 different locations in my career and over 9 states. And then about 5 days before COVID shut our company down, I took my last theater as a general manager in Colorado Springs. So that was a unique experience for sure. So I spent the first 3 months or so of my tenure at that location basically as a glorified janitor. And then we reopened and then closed, and then we reopened. And then I spent the rest of my time there, and then became workforce management administrator here at the what we call the CSC, or the Cinemark Support Center. And then a couple months after that, got promoted to director. My boss, Marie Zablocki, she wanted somebody with field experience. She has tons of workforce management experience, but no theater experience. So she thought the best course of action would be to bring someone in that really knows theaters and understands theaters and has great relationships with a lot of the general managers in our company. And so she brought me on board, and then she herself got promoted again, which made my advancement very, very fast.
Right.
So for the past year and a half, I've been immersed in all things workforce management. So it's been a lot of learning, but a lot of really taking the lead on everything that we're doing. We didn't have workforce management in our company until, I don't know, two and a half years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story of growth. And I mean, whether it's retail or theaters or restaurants, that type of growth is so common in the sense that once you found this passion within something, there is so often that story of, I started as a seasonal cashier or seasonal projectionist, to your point, and to see that growth, that's such an amazing story.
I mean, it's kind of like the mob, right? You try to get away, and then
and they just keep sucking you back in.
I had a lot of employees who over the years, they're like, I think I'm going to go get this other job. And they're like, that's great. But like you can see it in people, when they'll be back, because movie theaters, I had a lot of other jobs as a kid growing up, but there was something about movie theaters, and there's just this, like, not to sound cheesy, but there is sort of a magic to working in movie theaters and being around movies all the time. And so you can see that in people as soon as they start working for you a little bit, that they'll be back. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Happened to me too, actually. I left the company in 2006. I trained in martial arts most of my life, and I had an opportunity to run a martial arts school. And so I said, hey, sure, why not? It was a dream of mine. And it didn't really work out. And so I ended up back with cinema. So,
there you go.
Right, and appreciate you sharing your journey and career journey. And I guess just a couple questions for me, since you did kind of go through that process there. What were you most passionate about when you were in the field versus what are you most passionate about today, being in workforce management?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's sort of the same and different at the same time. So it's really the people. But as someone in the field, as a general manager, my passion really was developing people. I took a lot of pride in, just like me. I mean, most of the people in our company, like our executives and field leaders, they didn't start in this company thinking they would become a vice president with this company or a general manager with this company. And so, part of my I guess one of my fortes is identifying talent and really trying to develop that talent. Even if someone says, hey, I'm not really interested in becoming a general manager or moving up in the company or taking any number of paths that are available, I would train them as if, right? Because just like me, I had no idea. And then one day my GM said, hey, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, sure. But then I had all this training that I had to do. And so I tried to save people a lot of steps, and it's like, you may not think you do now, but let's just train you as if, so that when the day comes, you're ready to go. And so I developed a lot of general managers and other people here in the CSC, and that was something I took a lot of pride in. I think it's fun too, but it's great to see that change within someone, and you're giving them this career that's really quite fun. On the flip side of that, coming here to the office, again, it's the people, but it's a different way, right? Because I don't have a team of employees. I have a small team, a much smaller team of employees working for me here, but still developing people here because I want to see my team grow. But I still work very, very closely with, our regional vice presidents and our general managers and our theater managers. And, really it's all about making an impact, a positive impact on, their operations, making their life easier in some form or fashion, whatever that looks like, whether it's making sure they have the hours that they need, or making sure, Legion is configured the way they need it to be, all that kind of stuff. I just love what I do. So not to sound cheesy about it, but I really do.
No,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I mean, it's important to hear more of that these days. I think so often we're hearing about people who are miserable in what they do, or, so it's really, really nice and refreshing to hear how much passion you have for what you do and the teams that you work with and those that you've developed. And actually, I think it's the perfect segue to reintroduce what we're talking about today, which is how Cinemark is driving employee engagement. And, obviously, given the nature of your role, you are so connected to Legion and workforce management and all of that labor modeling and everything that kind of comes into play there. But I remember when we first spoke that you really did connect the workforce management and your role to employee engagement, and that there is this kind of like symbiotic direct correlation between the two. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just comes in a number of ways, and it takes someone who, I think it really does help to have a relationship, that's already existing with a lot of the people in the field. And, we're about 320 locations across the country, which initially I thought was a lot until I talked to somebody who worked at a company that had 5,000. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know how you maintain any kind of relationship. But, even though I have a handful of relationships out there, everybody talks to each other, and so word spreads very, very quickly about whatever might be happening. And so I try to stay really in tune with what they're all thinking, what they're all worried about, what they might complain about, which is fine. I mean, everybody reserves the right to have their issues and their concerns. And the only way that we can resolve those is if we know about them. Right. And so that's really one of the things that I try to do, at least in my role, is stay in tune with whatever those concerns might be. And if I can do something about it personally, then I will. I do a lot of theater visits too. So I'll travel around and I'll make sure to be in theaters. It's nice because it's a little nostalgic for me, because I can be like, oh yeah, pick up a broom every once in a while. But I'll take, a lot of those conversations that I have with the folks in those theaters, and I'll bring it back. So again, if it's something my team or myself can do, or, I can talk to the others around me and fill them in on what's going on to see if we can make something happen.
So that's great. So just in your experience, like what can you see in a difference between, say, an engaged employee, right? One that loves coming to work and doing all the things that they need to do, versus one that's not as engaged, right? Can you give us a little insight into that?
Sure. We just talked about something like this recently at a meeting we had about like actively engaged and was it not like non-actively disengaged? Like there are different types of employees and the different ends of the spectrum. And I mean, I can generally tell right away if somebody's not engaged. A lot of it comes down to attitude, right? They're just not, I mean, not to keep reusing the word engaged, but they're just not giving you anything. They might do the basics, the fundamentals of their job at whatever level. It might be frontline, it might be assistant manager, it might even be general manager. I mean, we'd like to think every single one of our general managers are actively engaged full-time all the time. But I mean, it happens with anybody, right? We get a little burned out, or there's challenges or whatever. And so, but I think really trying to be in tune and talking to these people consistently and constantly, and getting a sense of where they're at, where their headspace is. We do engagement surveys as a company, and we really do listen to them. I mean, I know a lot of people, they'll do the survey and they're like, they're not gonna read this, or if they do, they're not really gonna do anything. And I will tell you, the leader of our operations team really cares and really has done a lot just in the last, really since COVID, since we reopened. Because I mean,
that's amazing.
I would say our survey, our first survey coming out of COVID was not great, not super positive. There was a lot of frustration, which it's a tough time to go through for anyone.
Sure, yeah.
And our leader saw that and really wanted to take action. And I think sometimes it can be really little things, right? Just as little as maybe instead of a 50% discount, when you're working, you get a 75% discount, or things like for the general managers might be when they can take time off. It used to be we would black out holidays and summer and things like that. The busiest times, that's when the busiest movies come out. But instead, now we're way more flexible about like, hey, if you want to take Christmas off to be with your family, you need to make sure your operation is running smoothly, but do that, and so sometimes those little things, it's not just a pizza party. I think we've seen, if you're on social media, there's a lot of negativity and stuff like that centered around like the idea of a pizza party. And I put that in quotes because it's whatever along those lines. And so I think you got to do a lot more. It's the word I'm looking for, like something meaningful, that really, you got to listen to your people, and you actually have to do something that matters, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does. And I think that's another great response. And I really appreciate the insight. I think, sometimes we, from the outside looking in, I mean, I just went to Cinemark this past weekend and watched Guardians of the Galaxy. Right. And I was just looking I knew I was going to be speaking with you today, and I was looking around and seeing all the active employees, and really, like, the experience I had was great. And employees were certainly looked engaged to me from my perspective. So it's always interesting to hear how you feel with all the experience you have coming from that space. So to segue a little bit away from that and just disregarding COVID altogether, what would you say a theater manager's kind of greatest challenge is?
It's not an easy job, I'll tell you that. There's a lot going on, it used to be a lot simpler. Like not to say back in my day, but back in my day, it was just a simpler job. We served popcorn, Coke, candy, hot dogs, nachos, and then a movie, right? And it was very easy. There's just a lot more sort of administratively now. We have a much bigger selection of items. I think guests have changed their habits, their mindsets a lot. And then I think employees have also changed quite a bit. And I used to wonder, as I was getting older, is it the employee that's changing, or am I just getting old? And I think to a degree, it's a little bit of both, but it does seem notably different, the type of employee that we have nowadays, and what you really have to think about as you engage with your teams, and you have to be much more mindful, I think, about what they care about. Not to say it wasn't important 20 years ago. I just didn't seem to matter as much. I don't want that to come out wrong, because it all matters, but it didn't have as big of an impact, right?
Yeah, people like, quote unquote, left things at the door, and they didn't necessarily bring their whole selves to work, because that wasn't the way that workplaces worked, for lack of a better term. But then COVID really had a huge shift in that. So I think what you're saying is totally well placed, that now you're seeing employees who are not checking their whole selves at the door. They're bringing their entire selves to work, and managers have to be able to not only like accommodate full people and their entire being, but also understand what they care about, to your point, and how to, how to appreciate those things.
Yeah. I think too, speaking of challenges, is it's the flexibility that a lot seem to have with their time and schedules. I know as a GM, I would say my biggest anxiety as a GM is whenever I would go into work, the first thing I would ask my management team is, everybody here that's supposed to be here today? Because it was so frequent, call outs. And it's just a constant struggle. And you really have to work so hard to either make sure that everybody is there, even if you provide the greatest environment anyone could possibly imagine, you still deal with it frequently. And then on top of that, because of that, you have to figure out how you're going to manage that, and I've known people who purposely overschedule because they just know people are going to call out. You have to be really, really careful about that, right? From a budget standpoint.
Sure.
And some people are really good about it. Some people just know, okay, everybody showed up, so I know I need to cut hours. Some people aren't as good at it, and it can get away from you really fast. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because, when we think about what you mentioned about how the employee market has changed, in the sense that their demands are different, I'm curious to know what some of the biggest expectations employees have today in today's market, like what those expectations are. And then naturally, to your point, call outs are inevitable. We see this a ton in retail too. I shared with you that I came from a retail background. One of the greatest things, one of the greatest challenges that retailers deal with, which I'm sure you might also be able to relate to, is turnover. So,
Mhm.
is there also something that Cinemark is doing to help mitigate turnover? So, two questions for you there.
Yeah. So refresh my memory on the first question. So what are we doing to mitigate turnover? What was the other one?
Yeah. And then what are some of the biggest expectations that employees have in today's market?
Yeah.
Coming back to your point.
I think a lot of people say more money.
Hmm.
That's a big one. I don't know if that's always true, because I think I've even seen some businesses who are paying a lot of money and they still deal with a lot of turnover. I mean, my wife's
Mm-hmm.
family deals with the same thing, and that she's dealing with professionals, her
Mm-hmm.
frontline, service workers. So, but I think it is important. I think another expectation is flexibility. Um, like, we are very flexible. I mean, that was always the thing that I used as something that was kind of a recruiting tool, is like, we do have a very flexible schedule. Like, we can cater around people who are in sports or clubs or, school, whatever it is. And so I think that's still a pretty high priority for a lot of folks. I think people want to have fun at work, especially in the environment that we're in. So those are some of the big things that we see. And I think we try to do all of that as a means to mitigate turnover within the parameters of which we're able. If that, I mean, you can only pay. We do our best to be competitive in our pay. And again, I think we're very flexible as a company as far as schedules are concerned. Again, within parameters, it can sometimes people are like, I need a lot of hours, but I can only work on Tuesdays and Thursdays,
Right.
2 p.m. to 6 p.m. or something like that.
Right.
And so there is some parameters there.
They want more hours with parameters. Okay,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
and that kind of
Very
actually
strict parameters.
yeah, right. There's always going to be some parameters in there, and I mean, just going back to some of the things you said, I mean, I think it really hits the nail on the head with what employee expectations are. Likely, some of that is demographic, age demographics and things like that. I know you've probably seen some of those things happen with Cinemark as well, and I've certainly seen them with everything that I do also. But you talked a little bit about flexibility. You talked about competitive pay. And maybe I'm going back towards more of the theater managers' challenges and just trying to understand some of the things you guys are doing to help improve that experience and maybe solve some of those challenges.
Right. Well, one example is Legion itself, right? I think Legion is a great tool to, and I'm not being paid to say this.
Right.
We did not force Christopher to come on here. So.
Right.
I think like the ability to be able to swap shifts, right? I think that was something that we've been waiting around for a long time. It takes a lot of the load off the manager, honestly. When someone needs to give up a shift, there's just all this stuff that a manager would have to do to make that happen. And so having the app and having that ability to swap shifts or manage all of that within the app has been honestly really pretty cool. And I do know that our employees appreciate that a lot. I think something else that our management teams do, and we've really, I think, stepped up our game over the last few years, is just performance management in general, and giving better feedback, more timely feedback, whether it's pros or cons. I think it's something employees really do need and deserve, that feedback. And I think, again, back in my day, it was sort of overlooked a lot. You just sort of are trucking along and everybody's just kind of doing okay, and it's just a different day. I think as times have moved on, we've noticed how important it can be to make sure we really are giving that quality feedback and really managing the performance. And it just makes life easier, honestly, if you're doing it well, because then there's no surprises, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reflecting a lot about what you're saying as far as, how Legion has helped you and Cinemark. When I say you, it's like your role within Cinemark and what you do, but then also Cinemark thinking about like the teams and the frontline workers, it's always nice to hear that because, that's really the mission is to turn hourly jobs into good jobs. And how do you do that? How do you make it real? So it's really cool to hear your specific anecdotal feedback, but also like experience, because those challenges so personally and so intimately, coming from that background. So I think, just to kind of bring it back full circle here, we'd love to know or hear a little bit more about what's next, and maybe you can clue us into some insights here. But what is next on the workforce management roadmap? Where do you see any potential improvements? Are there things that you're really, like your blue sky that you're really hoping to see in the future?
Yeah. So, our big push for next year, we're not on an automated schedule or an advanced schedule. So that's really going to be the big push for us. And that's on our side right now. We're working with IT on some stuff. More immediately, we actually have a meeting with your product team tomorrow to look at kind of redesigning availability within Legion for our company. Just because there's some pieces to it that are frustrating for our management teams and employee teams. And so we're going to see so we're meeting with a bunch of folks, as well as some of our GMs and theater managers. They're here locally, and we're flying one in special from the East Coast. So,
that's awesome.
Pretty excited about that. We're very excited that Legion's even open to doing that kind of thing. I mean, I think there's some companies that would be like, "Oh, yeah, good luck." So, so it's nice that you guys are open to that.
And I think it's great that you get your GMs involved, right, in the process. I mean, I see a lot of companies that try to force things from the top down, but the fact that you're bringing in the field folks that are going to have to, for one, they have the expertise, right? But two, they're the ones that are going to have this.
To use it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
That's been a focus of mine since I got to the office. If I told myself one thing, it was to not forget what it was like. GM, and it can be easy because I've caught myself from time to time where I'm getting frustrated about something or whatever, and then I'm like, oh wait, because their life is not easy. It's just it's a stressful job. It's a hard job. On the surface, it looks like it shouldn't be, but I'm telling you, it can be a challenge. And I do think, to your point, I think it's very important to take their suggestions and their feedback, because again, they have to use it. And it just doesn't make sense to have people telling them how to use something when you're not the one that has to use it.
Right. It makes me think of one other question for you here, which is like, do you see the difference in employee engagement from before Legion, before workforce management, and especially since before you got involved, to where you and the team are today? Has there been that obvious and direct connection?
Yeah, I think it's a little tough because we rolled Legion out literally right as we reopened from COVID. I will say that rollout went very smoothly, and our people loved it. But it was such a tough time for everyone in that moment, and transitioning into workforce management, a better system. I have noticed over the past year and a half a little bit of a difference if people have, as people have become accustomed to, reaching out to me or my team, asking questions. They kind of understand a little bit better what questions to be asking, and what things could be available to them to make their life a little easier. Not just on the Legion side, but we manage the labor budgeting side as well. And so when it comes to maybe updating labor templates or understanding how their labor should work a little bit more effectively for them, I think we've seen an increase in sophistication in how they're thinking with that.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So. That's awesome. Do you guys? So when you typically go through and you're developing their labor budgets, so they're template based, I understand. So based upon volume tiers. So I know Tracy said that she had one last question, but we got a second last question. So what is the best advice you've received that you continue to live by, both personally and professionally?
So my dad used to say this to me all the time. And my dad's a former Marine. He's a very tough man. And whenever he used to say it to me, I used to roll my eyes and cuss him out under my breath. But what he used to say, a quote from Aldous Huxley, which is, rolling in the muck of your own discontent is never the best way of getting clean, meaning sorry for yourself. And that's some advice that again, I hated as I was going through whatever I happened to be going through. But in retrospect, as I look back on the things that I've struggled with in my life, it's served me well, both personally and professionally.
That's great, Christopher.
What a fabulous answer. And I knew what you were going to say because I'm familiar with that quote. And it's really, isn't it amazing how some people just so eloquently get their point across? It's like one sentence and you've got it. You know exactly what he meant.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing, amazing advice. And Christopher, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. I mean, it's been such a wonderful discussion and getting to hear firsthand what you and Cinemark are doing to drive employee engagement, how you've transformed your workforce through Legion and workforce management technologies. I mean, it's just incredible to see. I think we'll continue to see, I guess another word here to reuse is continued involvement, especially since you are taking feedback from your managers and bringing it back to our team internally to make the best use out of the resources that you have. So thank you so much for being open to chatting with us today and joining us on the podcast. I mean, it's been such a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome.
So for everyone listening, make sure you connect with Christopher. We'll have a couple links there. Catch a movie at Cinemark too. Don't forget that part. That's really important. That's right. And make sure you supersize your meals. Whatever snacks and things you get at the movies, go double because you listen to this podcast. And I certainly will. I love getting the really big popcorn and a really big soda. There's just something about movie theater popcorn that just brings me back. So for everyone listening, take yourself back to the good old days and head over to Cinemark. Christopher, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.